It's two conscious guys talking, where conscious male leaders come together and have a discussion that is deep, that is nourishing, that allows us to see the illumination of consciousness that's unfolding progressively for men that are waking up in the world, and where you can get insights on your own awakening as a man, and also for amazing women that want to learn more about men's challenges and struggles that have created some of the dysfunction we've seen within men in its society, often called, quote unquote, the patriarchy and other terms. What created it? What is the genesis of it all? What can we do about it today to empower men to be all that they're meant to be and to support the awakening of consciousness for men and women and all? Louis, it's just so great to be with you today, chatting with you. Been getting to know you online, and now today a little bit. I get a great sense of inspiration and energy, enthusiasm hanging out with you. I really appreciate that about you, my friend.
Same, man. You've got a skill that is fascinating to me and an energy that is congenial and yeah, just welcoming, and I appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, just interesting. Some of the things we've already talked about, a little bit of commonalities here and there that we've been talking about. We're all about fun and flow. That's your big thing, and I talk about that too. But yeah, today we're talking about, want to have a conversation about what it's like being a conscious guy these days. What it was like maybe growing up, dealing with male stereotypes. For me, I keep saying this lately, but I was a 70s, 80s kid. So those, like I think each era is slightly different, maybe not, entirely different, but back then it was a lot with, I don't know, like, well, are you into cars? Do you want to have sex with every girl you see? Like all these ideas of are you tough enough? Are, like it used to, there was a lot of baggage around if you were gay and stuff like that wasn't even a thought to even have. Like, you will be destroyed if you're that back then. Like that's how intense it was back then. It was crazy. So at least where I lived in the Midwest, that was the vibe. So it was a really different kind of time. And anyway, I could get into my whole journey, but I've been sharing lots of that already on all the other conversations. We can get into some of it, but I'm curious for you, like, you've got somewhat of a unique, we all have a unique journey, but what was your journey growing up, with all these different ideas of what it means to be a man, to be a guy and all that stuff? Like how did it show up for you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And, one of my commitments in life is mastery of the integration, the harmonious integration of masculine and feminine in myself and in business. So like, I'll just start with the beginning. My grandpa was a firm disciplinarian and arguably physically abusive to my mother. And my dad was unquestionably emotionally and physically viciously abusive to my mother, to the point of leaving her bleeding and dying on the floor, pregnant with my little brother inside of her. So the masculine as it stood when I was a child was not functional. It was highly dysfunctional. It was very much self-righteous, narcissistic, ego-driven, pain bodies, acting out, seeking significance from the feminine, not knowing that they could receive it from God or from within or give it to themselves, and having a lot of trauma, layers of trauma. And then, yeah, I spent a lot of my childhood, like, anger was not acceptable because that made me like dad. There was a lot of judgment, and, we resist persists. So I also had anger problems. Or challenges where that would come out, and it was really fear. It was fear of not appeasing dad. It was terror of being like him. It was seeing the masculine as this very dangerous thing, and then covering it over with over-intellectualization and desensitization to emotion, and what we call packing and stacking. Like, instead of feeling through and releasing, it was lots of layers of stuckness. And as luck would have it, excuse me, they put me on Ritalin. I think it was somewhere between preschool and middle of elementary school. And I distinctly remember crushed up Ritalin pills in water being the most disgusting thing in the world, but being offered it every day at lunch. And so my brain, like, I became kind of a hamster on a wheel, a brain taxi. And, you know, other male figures or archetypes I grew up with, Captain Kirk, Captain Spock from Star Trek. And I really wanted to be Kirk because he's brash and bold and gets all the ladies and all this. And then I found myself bordering more into being Spock, valuing the cold, rational, logical, emotionless, objective, stoic perspective on things. And I found myself, cultivating that, really. So as time went on, high school, I became very religious. I started to look up to the priests and the saints and Christ, really, in a meaningful way. And I had been Christian, but I didn't really commit solidly to the archetypes of masculinity and Christianity until high school. And I really wanted to be a Christianity or a sacraments or theology teacher. Like, that's what I thought I was going to do, until one of my best friends, he was a Protestant, and I didn't have any big brother. So you need to, or the listeners, whoever's consulting this for more wisdom and understanding around masculinity, right? For a lot of my high school and college career, and then afterwards as well, I was latching onto father figures because I paradoxically knew there had been something wrong with my dad, such that I couldn't be around him. The divorce separated us geographically. But I also had a felt sense of a need for masculinity in my life. So I'd latch onto preachers or priests. I'd latch onto my best friend, Steve, in high school. He was like a couple years older than me, one grade ahead of me. And he didn't ever become a father figure, but there was an energy of like looking up to him to kind of find the answers in life. And so many of my teachers through high school, male teachers, eventually, even as I got into the professional world, coaches who I'd project all of my unhealed shit from masculinity onto. One of the greatest father figures I've ever had is Kirk McDowell. He's a former high level, like, has taught tens of thousands of people in large group trainings for one of the biggest organizations in the world. And we would do coaching, and he was just massively generous. So I'm kind of collecting the rogues gallery as well as the Justice League of different male archetypes as I'm walking you through my story. And, he too had like resistance to being aggressive, because he had been, there had been some measure of that in his world. So we came to kind of butt heads a lot. And, it was only when I began to distinguish for myself that the feminine is valuable and the feminine is powerful, especially in manifestation, in creation. There's so much ease when you're in alignment, and so much less work required, so many fewer actions demanded of you, because the actions are more effective, because when you're surrendered and you're in flow. And so I started to cultivate this over these past couple of years, especially after reconciling with dad and forgiveness work and all sorts of that. But I'll say, like, the true final, or not final, because I'm still doing the work, the true most recent harmonization of masculine and feminine in me, and reconciliation of me with myself in my masculine and with my feminine inside of me with my masculine, came from a distinction from Earth Waking University. And I'll sort of paint the picture of it, it's this idea of the relationship triad. The relationship triad has the hero, the victim, and the villain. And the hero, and we all have these inside of us. We default to one depending on where we're at in the moment, or what we learned when we were a child, what we saw our parents doing. So the hero falsely thinks they need significance from doing things. They need love from saving people. They need victims to rescue from circumstances or people in order for them to be okay. So they see, where I work now would be one of my clients seeing someone who can't pay them and saying, dun, 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 putting on the cape like, oh, I'll lower my prices for you. Like, I'll save you from being a powerless victim who can't create the money to invest in a $3,000 or $5,000 program. Like, okay, well, that's clearly an example of the hero. The hero is also exemplified by my last relationship. Early on, consciously, I thought what I was doing so I live by the perspective that if you're not in peace, love, and joy, you're in a lie. If you're experiencing something other than peace, love, and joy, there is a shard or a pocket of poison and pain from big and little t trauma that happened in your past, whether in this lifetime or previously, no comment at this point, that is it's asking for your attention in this now moment so that you can feel through it, heal it, release it, and rise vibrationally. So in the last relationship, consciously, when I came to the relationship, I said, hey, I have this commitment, and love confronts dysfunction, fear comforts in dysfunction. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid for you. There's nothing to be afraid of ultimately on this planet. So because I love you, if you're ever not in peace, love, and joy, I'm going to call it out with love. Like love confronts dysfunction lovingly. There's an ego thing to that where the ego can be like, you're not in peace, love, and joy. Like that energy, I'm not about that anymore. I was. The ego can take anything and pervert it. But there was a commitment between her and I of not only will I call it out, but I will offer you a breakthrough. I will give you the gift of my, basically at that point, newly respected, valued coaching services to help you clear. And it was so nourishing and so beautiful. So God can be in action, and source can be making beautiful things happen at the same time as the ego is still in play. So she healed so many amazing things, and she was such a different person by the time our relationship was over. But throughout the relationship, especially in those first 6 months, I was burning out. I was overgiving. I was sacrificing my well-being, my self-care, my financial security in order to rescue her. And she was also, another example of this is you can't have a hero without a victim. And the hero's worst fear will always come upon them. The hero will inevitably become the villain, because the victim gets their significance from being powerless, gets their toxic mimic of love from having someone rescue them. So she had some measure of that. She also was hero to me. So we're all guilty, right? Cancel clear on guilty, right? Nobody's guilty. We're all perfect.
Yeah.
But we all had the same thing going on. And heroes tend to attract victims. Victims tend to attract heroes and villains. So, there was a strong masculine edge inside of me. There was I'm going to do it. That's it, period. Strong will, clear direction, definite focus, driven, linear goals and all of that. And then with her, she was very much flow in her feminine, and very much present moment. And what's the point? And we don't need money, and it's all okay. And I can live on very little. And I just want to do my art. And I loved all of that because it was such a great compliment to me. But at the same time, it was very toxic. I experienced intense periods of financial suffering that I didn't have to go through because I blew so much money from my first 10, 12, 14K months on going halfway across the country to visit her, or, not managing money well. And So anyway, I was the hero. She was the victim. She was the hero to me. She was also the victim. And she rescued me from some of my insecurities time after time. Some of the moments where I was acting out of, I can't, I won't, I'm not able, I'm not capable, can't so clear again. And near the end of the relationship, the last 6 months or so, I started to get clear on my focus. I started to double down and I started to like say, all right, I'm going to do it. That's it, period. This is the direction I'm going. And I started realizing I've been using you, my love, for sabotaging my self-care subconsciously. And I realized that I was afraid of my dad coming out in me. I was projecting my mom onto her in the best moments and my dad onto her in the worst. And she was doing the same thing with me. She was projecting her father onto me in her best moments, the tender, loving part of him, and her mother, brutal, vicious, physical, and emotional abuse. She was projecting that onto me. She was calling that forth in me. So everybody's either a mirror or a chef for us in relationship. They're either reflecting what's inside of us that's unhealed by showing us the frequency externally of what there is to address, or they are serving up the meal of what we are most resisting. And so this is, do I have permission to get really vulnerable?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So my last fight with her, what really put the nail in the coffin of the relationship, after several periods where we had tried to step out of communication so that we could engage in self-care on our own, both of which containers she broke by getting back into communication with me, sending me these sweet messages, which consciously were like, you know, I love you and I miss you. And like subconsciously though, she was looking for me to affirm her significance. And I was receiving ego strokes and significance from her just by getting the message. So like that last week was me falling back into the pattern of sabotaging self-care and using her to do it, and then blaming her when she wasn't taking responsibility. And then she turned me into the villain. A day after she gave me the key to her house, we got into a really angry fight. I call it the Velociraptor cataclysm, because both of our shadows came out so aggressively, and we were just rude and mean and hurtful, and to the point where we couldn't, it was like two TVs talking to each other. Neither one of us was home. And she went straight into victim, called her parents and got her parents to come over to kick me out of the house. And her parents called the police because she had just given me a key to the house. And I was like, no, this is, and I was using her for significance still. And she was using me. And when I had turned villain, she called in new heroes. So most people who are in the masculine or in the feminine, or are looking at masculine or feminine archetypes, and I've done hours and weeks, maybe like a month and a half now of work on what led to that cataclysm, what led to that level of trigger, what led to that level of fighting and chaos. And, you know, on my side, I was resisting being heard or not being heard. I was resisting not being understood. I was resisting not having my perspective validated, because she was damaging my self-care at the same time as I was using her. It's like the 6 and the 9. Like I see a 6, you see a 9, they're both true. Yeah. And so I didn't have a healthy relationship with the feminine. She didn't have a healthy relationship with the masculine. And I was using her to subdue and suppress my aligned, healthy masculine, the direction, the focus, the determination, the drive, but also with that sort of like, and you see in the yin yang, that little yin quality of love and support. And one of the axes that I use to describe the masculine feminine balance in a man, at least, is the surgeon and the nurse. The surgeon is like, let's do something, let's fix the thing, let's change the circumstance, let's heal you. The nurse is like, okay, I'm just going to be with you, I'm just going to hold you, I'm going to listen, I'm going to affirm and validate wherever you're at, whatever's going on for you. And so there was such a failure for me to be either of those, which I consider both aspects of the healthy masculine, when I was with her. Because the fact that we were triggered meant we both had shit going on. It's like Eve ate the apple and then Adam ate the apple. Nobody's in love anymore. Nobody's in original innocence anymore. So nobody's home. The two TVs talking to each other to get back to love and to surrender to divinity.
Right. You're both in the pain body or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I've spent all this work to see where have I in seeking coaches use them as heroes for me and affirm their need to do things to save me as a victim.
Right.
And where have I, by hook or by crook, by accident of ego, been villain in circumstances? And like, there is an aggressive, unhealthy masculine shadow that in the past was inside of me that came out as a narcissistic, intellectually defensive, aggressive, self-righteous, manipulative bully. And I think, and so to finally come round to your initial like question with all this is just kind of my journey laid out and where I've landed. Once somebody can get the hero, victim, villain triad out of the way, then they can begin to address for themselves, where have I patterned after unhealthy masculine in my family, in my culture, in my civilization? And oh man, I hope you don't mind. There's one more tangent and that I want to jump on is the unhealthy masculine for me also looked like Casanova. It also looked like, I spent most of high school noticing all these people who were playing Catholic around me while I was serious about it, having sex, going out on dates, getting the hot women to go to the dances with them, and me thinking, man, that'd be cool. The moment, it was like a rubber band. The moment I got released from Catholicism, I slung
for free.
Yeah.
Hallelujah, we're free.
It was like drugs, sex, rock and roll to a certain extent, the Doors a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit of Bohemian Rhapsody and Ozzy Osbourne, all of that. And so I found myself enculturated suddenly and strange, like it was like a strange attractor towards not knowing that I had these unhealed wounds of not feeling worthy, not believing that love was possible, and also these other beliefs of like, oh, if I have sex with a beautiful woman, then that means I'm loved. That means I'm lovable. That means I'm valuable. That means I'm accomplished something. So I spent years chasing sex and, creating some really amazing adventures and experiences. But on the other side of it, not being satisfied, not being healthy, not being aligned, not being fulfilled, and eventually realizing the bankruptcy of that and choosing, okay, all right, well, I'm not about suppression. I'm not about unrestrained expression anymore. I'm about alignment. And I think for anybody listening, what masculinity looks like to you is going to depend on so many things. It's going to depend on genetics. It's going to depend on your culture. It's going to depend on you choosing or not to take responsibility and heal the wounds in your family, in yourself, in your relationship with your father, especially. And then being on that spectrum of masculine to feminine, because like we all have both polarities inside of us. And, just like there's a Kinsey scale, there's like a degree to which we can cultivate healthy or unhealthy masculine in ourselves. And then there's toxic masculine and toxic feminine. Toxic feminine is like, yay, let's go eat, drink, and be merry, to the point of not planning for the future. And toxic masculine is like, I'm gonna push you and
dominate.
Whip you to go do what you should be doing.
Right.
And I even found that happen. Very, very last thought. I found that in me with my clients a couple weeks ago, where I was subconsciously using them for significance, attached to their results, attached to them doing the work, and resisting them not doing it, and lashing the whip like, hey, y'all, success is structural. Who's taking action? Hey, y'all, who's taking action? And they felt the pressure of that. And I had to come up and say, hey, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I didn't see that I still had this stuff going on in the background that led me into being unhealthy masculine. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Thanks for the adventure of listening. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. That's all great. I mean, there's a lot there to, and that, I love these conversations, because that actually happens quite a lot, where I think it demonstrates the desire for conscious men to teach and share, but also to like uh, to reflect and like, hey, I got all this stuff I've dealt with and I moved through, and you're not the first person. I had a lot to say, like right off the bat, like a lot of things like coming out. So I appreciated that, and yeah, I mean, getting back to a little bit about what you're saying earlier on too, with your dad, like that, yeah, that is not a situation many of us, well, there are quite a few, but not a lot of us anyway, maybe we're in something quite that dramatic, experiencing, being a part of something in a family where that's happening with dad, harming mom and blood, and and she's pregnant, all this. So so yeah, that would be a very deep wound, and for sure, and there's so many, yeah, so we're all different in that way. I think, yeah, like I don't ever want to be that, that's a chord that I think really is pretty common for a lot of guys. Like I will not be that guy. For me, it showed up again as like I've been sharing like with my sister getting pregnant when she was 20, 21 years old at the time, but for me, it was out of the blue. She wasn't married. She had sex with multiple people at the time. She didn't even know who the father was. Once it was all figured out, he didn't want anything to do with it. He walked away. And that on top of probably other things, other experiences with Ben, for sure. But especially that one, I was like, okay, subconsciously I thought I'll never be that. So forget dating life. Like I didn't want to get close to that, as it might not look like it, but I am actually a high testosterone kind of dude. I mean, like I would be going, it would be torture for me to try to date girls and suppress myself all the time. So I was like, okay, I'll take care of that problem. I just won't date anybody. Okay, that's easy. I'm shy anyway. So that worked out. I'm like, okay, I don't have to be awkward or anything. I'll just wait till later in life for all that stuff. And basically I did. So I kind of shut all that down because I didn't trust, my own sense of impulses that I could become one of these kind of guys, and then all these guys that were doing things like that, right? Like similar to you, like the judgment. Oh my God, how could you be like that? All those kind of ideas come up, and then we think we're so much better, and we have our ego with that, and yeah, it's pretty interesting. Then when you get into spirituality, then it's later in life you get into spirituality. I'm awoken. Everybody else isn't. Like I know better now, and that stuff. Then you get into that. Like there's so many layers of ego, and I hear, I can hear my own journey in my own way, as you share yours, but like the layer of ego of like I'm better than they are because I'm being a real Catholic, and I'm better than you because now I know better because I'm an atheist now, and I know better than you because now I'm this, or now I've got this information. Now I'm a hero to this wonderful lady that needs saving, and I can do it, and and I'll be there now, like my dad with my mom, right, and all that kind of stuff, and right. I'm gonna save the day now. We're gonna make it all right. To me, again, like when I look at Will Smith slapping, Chris Rock, I just think he's just still trying to save his mom from when he was like when there's abuse in the house as a kid, like yeah, there was abuse, and he didn't stand up to his dad who was in the Marines, so he was like, that was a huge moment. What a bigger moment to pick to finally defend his mom, to get up on that stage right in that big moment with millions and millions of people watching and slap Chris Rock. I finally did it. I finally did it, like in a big way. And then, so to me, it's all, like even that moment is very beautiful. Ultimately, we could all have judgments about it and ideas and concepts. It's actually very beautiful what unfolded. I mean, ultimately, like it's pointing to something that, again, needs to be addressed. Whenever there's a crisis or something needed to be addressed, there was something that needed to be addressed. Absolutely. So yeah, that's interesting. Your idea card. I love that. Yeah.
Yes, it comes from virtual events where they gave us these so that we could share our reactions. I'm curious, is that the origin point for these conversations? Was you noticing something in the public consciousness around masculine, and maybe even particularly that event, or is that just something that's there for you right now?
No, oh no, it's for me because I was very awkward with my masculine. I was into sports, but I wasn't, in on a lot of other aspects of traditional masculine kind of focuses and things like that. I was a deep introverted guy, and I always thought, kind of everything was kind of BS. This is BS. That's BS. Everything's BS. It's kind of more of that kind of person, growing up as a teenager, especially. When you get into the hormones and everything, it's like, okay, I'm becoming who I really am, and I say screw all this. So for me, it was more that I've had, because I have a strong masculine energy, but I show up as soft and gentle. So that was something I had to, and it bothered me that people would think, oh, you're just some soft, gentle cupcake dude, probably just blow on you, fall over. I'm like, oh yeah, just the opposite, but you don't see it. So, but don't worry about it. You'll find out, you come this way, you're going to find out, and I never fought people, but like when situations would come up, people would be, amazed. I remember these big guys, like would threaten me or whatever, like friends of friends, it'd be like one was like 250 pounds, that's much bigger than me anyway, taller and everything. And he's like, we're just something as simple as like pushing up against each other like elk, right? And then here I am 70 pounds lighter, and I'm standing my ground. I'm not even trying that hard. Or getting on the football field with a 300-pound guy that played football in college or high school. I forget what it was, but something. And yet I can stand my ground with him, right? Like we're taking a friend and throwing him up on a snowbank when I was a teenager, or just so many things where there's a switch that flips inside of me, and it's just transcendent power. And I associate with the masculine because it's got that kind of edge in it often. It doesn't have to. I can get into transcendent power that just comes from the infinite, and so that doesn't have a flavor of color. But, just that sense of power, and not trusting the power that I have. So that's been like something that has been a lifelong thing that, of course, I've evolved with. Much better place. I'm a much more peaceful place than ever before with it, because before it was always like, how do I be the nice guy and try to prove what a badass I am, like this kind of idea. And finally, what's kind of happened for me is it just sort of feels like everything's integrated. I show up badass in the ways I meant to show up badass. I show up as just gentle, loving, and kind as well. It's like it just all is what it is. It's more in that space now, whereas before I was always trying to figure out how am I supposed to be as a guy. So I love your question, because that is exactly what has created me interviewing not only for this series, but years ago I did a whole Enlightened Men's Summit and everything, and we got into it back then. And so it's been an ongoing kind of an exploration for me, because I know I'm not the only one. I've heard so many other guys say, when I get really into my energy, I'm like the Hulk, I could kill anybody. And like I've heard things like that sounded like, kind of an aspect of me that I had experienced, right? Or just these conflicts with like being the nice guy versus being, especially when you're sensitive as a guy, right? Versus being like kind of assertive and like strong and, focused and everything. But then again, me too, I've had that experience of being like that, like many years ago, like being very like that, to a point where people get results, but and it still happens to this day sometimes. They get results, but by the time we're done, they don't want to talk to me anymore. They're kind of like, I can't get away. My wife said it when we first started dating. It's like, and then I had to even back off with her. She's like, being around you can't get away with anything. And it's like, I'm like, oh yeah. And then like, but then I'm not probably, for most people, not everybody, but most people can't even be around me then when I'm being that badass. I'm just like, come on, no more of that BS, get with the truth, truth is you're not a victim. And so, but yeah, I totally identify with what you talked about. Yeah, the hero, the victim, the villain. yeah, we don't want to be the villain, but what I've understood for myself is we need to be willing to experience everything. You need to be willing to experience being a hero, be the villain, be the victim, be the, there's other character types too, right? The guy, or whatever, all these different ones. And we're meant to embrace everything from my perspective, not to make any of them wrong, but to be consciously aware of what role, if we get too like hypnotized into a role, or or get unawake, like to realize like you've gone to a place where you're not really centered now. Now you're just playing out that one aspect of your being. You're caught up in it. Is how I see it. So anyway, you unloaded a lot from me there, Lewis. So
Happy to, delighted by.
yeah.
I wanted to actually go back to a couple things, and I know we're close to end time right here, but
Yeah.
the aspiration to healthy masculine currently, like what that looks like in my world and where I'm visualizing towards, is one piece. And then the other piece is completing the triad. I meant to say, like, the triad is just a way of describing how teachers, preachers, family, friends, media, and government program us to be in unhealthy relationships. There's nothing you need to be saved from ever. There's nothing I need to be saved from ever. And there's no reason for me to wave a gun around like the bank robber does in order to get significance, assuming that love is no longer possible. And that's what the villain does. The villain is forcing significance, attention, connection where it's not consented to. And yeah, they're just, the more I have seen these pieces in myself, and the more I have stripped away the need to use people for significance by me saving them, or the need to use them by them saving me, or to get their attention, to demand and manipulate and control and dominate for their attention, the healthier all of my relationships have been. Because love doesn't come from people. Love comes through people when we're tuned to it as a function of our self-love and our connection to God. Same with abundance, and same with abuse. Abuse doesn't come from people. Abuse comes through people when we are tuned to it. So it's ultimately all our responsibility anyway. So if somebody's on the triad, they're going to attract partners to play with and to keep pissing them off and putting them in shitty places, and contributing shitty places to their partner on the triad. And so for me, what healthy masculinity has looked like has been taking full responsibility for my health, my wealth, my happiness, my relationships, my spiritual connection, giving it my best, giving it my all, giving it my will. Like, my current journey is from the understanding that you can't give to God what you don't have. And to quote one of my favorite spiritual masters, the last task but one is the total cultivation or development of the will. Because you can't surrender a will that hasn't been honed, harnessed, and sharpened to the fullest degree. And the place where the masculine, and where I feel called, is the will towards wealth. I mean, it could be the will towards health, right? You see this in Arnold Schwarzenegger. He developed his skill to give his life to what I believe is very largely his service to the world, and bodybuilding and his cinematic career and all that. Like, he developed his will before he was able to use it in surrender to his purpose. And so for me, healthy masculine is like, it's being assertive, it's being strong, but still having that capacity for tenderness and love and sensitivity and empathy. And it's also being relentless, an unmitigated force of nature in the world that isn't stopping for anyone or anyone. It doesn't need to rescue anyone from how I am expressing. Like, I'm me. And if that bothers you, that's you. You're the one triggered by that, not me. Right. And yet at the same time, if somebody gets triggered by me in an intimate context or whatever, like, I'll confront dysfunction and maybe provide space, right? Maybe lean in a little bit more to that nurse side. And yeah, I mean, the best masculine, and the very last thought on this, I did a course that Earthwaking put out called Divine Relationships. And there was a quote from the woman who created the course. She said, "The worst thing a woman wants is to be stuck behind a parked car, a man who isn't going anywhere." And this may sound like more traditional notions of masculine and feminine. It's really worked for me. Like the masculine is goal-oriented, the masculine is future-oriented, the masculine makes things happen. The feminine is present, the feminine is connected, the feminine is aligned, the feminine is surrendered. And the masculine, when it's at its best, is surrendered to a higher principle, is surrendered to a mission or a vision larger than itself, a purpose that transcends it. And I think that's the only way for a man to really, truly be safe and healthy in this world and aligned, is to find something to someone, ideally, God, spirit, source, infinite intelligence, to surrender to, such that the full, relentless, unmitigated, sharpened sword and power of his will and his expression are calibrated and contextualized and regulated and organized and harnessed to its fullest extent, to where you're not leaving anything on the table, but also to where, like, in the moment, if the divine that you're surrendered to dictates be more feminine, express from a more feminine energy, you're also available for that too. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. That's what I'm talking about, is letting, I guess it's like try to put an image to it. Maybe it's sort of like a dance or something, you know. That's kind of how it unfolds. It's like I just remember recently, a few days ago, I was on an enrollment call with somebody, and I felt like being really strong and sharp with that person. Like, and it's like this, and it's like that, and then this person didn't enroll right away, but she gave me an interesting response, like, well, I don't know yet, but I'll know what I know, and an effusive kind of response. And I just thought, like, the me of 5 or 10 years ago probably would have pressed her further and made her commit and do all these things, right? Probably even try to sign her up on the spot, like, entirely. I'm like, okay, that's where you are. I know, like, from my experience at least, if I keep pressing after talking as much as we already had and keep pressing it, it doesn't always go so great. It usually doesn't go so great, even if they sign up to work with me. So, like, okay, you are where you are. I'm not going to even try to talk you out of that. All right. So we're done today. All right. Here. So we're done. Okay. So, but then afterwards, I felt pretty tense afterwards. And I was like, then the feminine started flowing back in. I'm like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter. Whatever she does, I don't care. I'm done now. And there was just this sense of just wanting to get back into a peaceful present, because there was a lot of tension that was coming through that process at that moment in time. That I'm standing strong for this person, but quite frankly, she was kind of showing up like, yeah, okay, like, mostly, not entirely, but kind of like, yeah, okay, like, okay, you're not really responding, so that's you're not showing you're responding too much. It's time for me to back off. I've planted the seeds. Either that's doing something for you, which I'm sure it is, but maybe you're not ready yet, so it's time to let you go. So yeah, that dance, where in the past, like, there were times where I would just, I know I'm going to keep going until you, like, kick me out of the room, like, or hang up on me. It might be more towards that level, maybe not that quite that extreme, but almost that extreme. Like, I ain't taking no for an answer. I'm not taking your stories for an answer, because and part of it probably was this hero thing. Like, I will play the hero and the villain if that's what it's going to take to bring you across, whatever it takes. So what I've learned, like, you have to be willing to let go. Once I started getting into the power of the masculine, and then I had to learn, like, to back off again, because when you start, oh, now let's really go masculine, then I had to, yeah, exactly. A pendulum swing is what Lewis is showing. Yeah. So that's totally been my journey. I had to find my center.
Yeah, it's a dance, and it's an eternal practice, this integration of the feminine and the masculine. I've seen that, and I literally, to one of my clients, and for the listeners, what I do, I'm very similar in what my man here does in helping people get their businesses around up and running, and have it be spiritually nourishing. And so, like, I was coaching one of my clients on selling, and he was like, yeah, I felt like being soft, and it was weird because I have lost so many people by not being hard. And I was like, well, that's that's growth, that's maturity. Like, because his intuition was saying, be soft in the moment. And like, most people start off in the toxic feminine. They don't know what to do. They don't assert themselves. Then you go to the healthy masculine, which is the learn to assert yourself. And then once you're able to do that, then you can surrender in the right way. And then it becomes a dance between the healthy feminine and the healthy masculine. And for him in that moment, like, yeah, for me, the ultimate answer to the expression of what is meant to be from or through me in this moment of masculine or feminine can only come through intuition, can only come through surrender to something that sees more than my ego ever can. Right. So, yeah.
Totally. Oh, that's an awesome place to wrap up. Very well said. I super appreciated everything you had to share. Felt like we had an amazing conversation today around all this, and I know it's going to bless a lot of people's lives. And so just thank you so much for sharing today, Louis.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure being here. It's a pleasure hanging out with you.
Thank you for listening in to Just Two Conscious Guys Talking, where our mission is to impact millions of men ultimately to deepen their awakening by examining their consciousness of what's been unfolding for them with male stereotypes and programming that has allowed them to have opportunities to evolve during these times. It's an exciting time to bring more love to men and women around the world, and we are grateful for you tuning in today. Feel free to share this episode and keep tuning in, and also look in the show notes for a link to get notifications of future episodes. Until the next time, everyone, goodbye for now.